In November 1956, the film, Love Me Tender, was released into theaters. The film title was based on the song released by Elvis Presley and also featured Presley in his acting debut. Across America, girls who idolized Presley flocked to the theaters in droves. Among them were two sisters, Barbara Grimes and Patricia Grimes. Barbara was 15 years old. She was a high school sophomore and was described as mature and serious. Patricia was 13 years old. She was a 7th grader who was fun and lively. Despite their differences in personality, the two sisters were very close. The sisters also had two brothers, Jimmy and Joey, and two older sisters, Teresa and Shirley. The children's parents were divorced, and the children lived with their mother, Loretta Grimes, in McKinley Park. As Elvis Presley fans, the sisters had seen Love Me Tender several times before, but they saved up some money in order to watch the film again. On December 28, 1956, the sisters were given permission to go see the film with the condition that they were to be home before midnight. The sisters left home on their way to a theater in Brighton Park, which was located on the southwest side of Chicago. The sisters even ran into their friend, Dorothy Weinert, at the theater. Weinert sat behind the sisters for the first part of the film, and she saw the sisters while they were buying popcorn and snacks. Midnight passed, and the sisters had not made it home. Loretta became concerned as her daughters were never late. Loretta sent two of her other children to check the bus stop, but none of the bus drivers had seen the sisters. With no sign of the sisters, Loretta reported them missing at approximately 2 a.m. Police arrived to investigate, but they did not take the missing sisters seriously. They assumed the girls had run away, and they came up with a theory that the sisters probably took a bus to Nashville to try and meet Elvis Presley in real life. The story of the missing sisters gained media attention. Elvis Presley heard the story, and on January 19th, he made a plea for the sisters to return home. Quote, "If you are good Presley fans, you'll go home and ease your mother's worries." End quote. The police figured that the Grimes sisters would soon return home after hearing Presley's plea. But when there was still no word from the sisters, police began to realize that the disappearance was probably the result of an abduction. Investigators from nearby agencies were called in to assist, and a task force was created. The investigation started with the night the sisters disappeared. Several witnesses saw the sisters at the theater during the film. But police struggled to find what happened after the film, as witness stories varied. A few teenagers claimed to have seen the sisters get into a Mercury automobile driven by a man resembling Elvis Presley. Other witnesses claimed that the sisters had gotten on a bus headed east. A bus driver stated that he dropped the sisters off at a location that was approximately halfway between the sisters' home and the theater at approximately 11 p.m. Yet other witnesses claimed seeing the sisters jumping around McKinley Park, and there were other reports that the sisters were seen in Nashville. As sightings continued to flood in, police quickly lost control of the investigation. They began to go door to door in neighborhoods around the theater, hoping to gather more information. 300,000 people were questioned, 15,000 flyers were distributed, and hundreds volunteered in the search. There was even a reward offered by the church the Grimes family attended. But soon, the search would come to a tragic end. On January 22, 1947, a man named Leonard Prescott was driving to his home located in Willow Springs. Prescott spotted what he believed were two mannequins laying on the other side of the guardrails that lined the road near Devil's Creek. Prescott continued to drive, but he had a funny feeling about those mannequins. Prescott arrived at his home, picked his wife up, and the two drove back to the location where he had spotted the mannequins. A closer inspection revealed that the mannequins were actually the lifeless bodies of Barbara and Patricia Grimes. They were nude and their bodies were frozen. Soon, police swarmed the location. It was estimated that over 160 police officers from neighboring jurisdictions arrived to assist in the investigation. They combed the area for evidence, but the large search was later criticized for being disorganized and allowing untrained individuals to participate. The crime scene produced little to no evidence. It was speculated that the search party most likely stomped over any potential evidence. It was noted that no clothing belonging to either sister was found. Investigators believe that the sisters were not killed at this location, but their bodies had been placed or thrown after they were killed. The investigators would have to wait for the autopsy results for further evidence. The autopsy had to wait until the following day to give the bodies time to thaw. The autopsies were conducted by 3 experienced forensic pathologists. Barbara had several wounds that were believed to be rodent bites and puncture wounds from what was believed to have been caused by an ice pick. There was evidence that Barbara had likely engaged in sex around the time of her death, but it was unknown if it was consensual or not. Patricia had bruises to her body and face. Neither sister had alcohol, drugs, or poison in their system. During the autopsies, the 3 pathologists were unable to come to an agreement on the time and manner of death. The stomach contents were analyzed to narrow down an estimated time of death. Both the sisters had remains of the dinner and snacks consumed on the night of their disappearance. This finding narrowed down the time of death to approximately 5 hours after the sisters left the theater. It was concluded that the cause of death was murder, with a secondary explanation of shock from exposure to the elements. Cook County Coroner Walter McCarran was one of the pathologists. He concluded that the sisters' bodies had been left for several weeks before they were found. He believed that the cold weather had preserved the condition of the bodies, and layers of snow had been deposited on top of the bodies, preventing them from being immediately discovered. In the days prior to the discovery of the bodies, the weather was warming up, causing the snow to melt. Eventually, the snow had melted enough to uncover the bodies, which allowed them to be discovered. However, the autopsy findings were disputed by Harry Gloss, who was the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office. Gloss claimed that the autopsy reports had been altered and disclosed several findings. Gloss claimed that Barbara's stomach contained curdled milk, which was not something Barbara was known to have consumed on the day of her disappearance. Gloss also stated that semen had been discovered on Patricia, which led him to conclude that both sisters had been sexually assaulted. The autopsy concluded that several wounds to the face and bodies were from rodent bites, but Gloss came to the conclusion that the marks were from violence inflicted upon the sisters. Gloss theorized that the sisters had been kept alive until January 7th. He came to this conclusion by speculating that the heat of a human body would have caused the snow to melt, creating a thin layer of ice that was formed around the bodies. Gloss believed that the thin layer of ice could have only been formed after January 7th, based on the levels of snowfall. Gloss was fired by McCarran for disclosing confidential information. Gloss would insist that he had been fired for political reasons and the autopsy results had been altered. Cook County Sheriff Joseph D. Lohman took Gloss's side as he agreed with Gloss's account of the autopsy findings. Sheriff Lohman was convinced that the sisters had been lured into a vehicle after the film was finished and were beaten and tortured by a sexual predator. Gloss was hired by Sheriff Lohman as an unpaid investigator, which allowed Gloss to continue his investigation. Police were also looking into a strange tip they received on January 15th. Before the sisters' bodies had been found, a man had called the police tip line and stated that he had a dream that the sisters were dead and that the bodies would be located in Lyons Township. The caller refused to give his name, but police were able to trace the phone call back to Walter Krantz. Krantz was a self-declared psychic, and the sisters' bodies were discovered a week later just 1 mile away from where Krantz had predicted. But there was also a ransom note that Loretta Grimes received that was thought to have been written by Krantz. He denied any involvement during multiple interviews, and no charges were ever filed against Krantz. Gloss continued his investigation, and he was able to locate several witnesses who claimed that they saw the sisters alive after the night of December 28th. One of the witnesses was a restaurant owner who said he saw the sisters at his restaurant on the morning of December 30th. The sisters were in the company of 2 men. One of the men was a part-time dishwasher at the restaurant named Benny Bedwell. The restaurant owner reported his story on January 24th. Police located Bedwell. He was a 21-year-old drifter who had worked various jobs in Chicago. The police took Bedwell to a motel where he was kept for 3 days. By the end of the 3 days, Bedwell had signed a 14-page confession admitting to the murders. Bedwell's confession said that he was with another man and that they were with the sisters until the night of January 7th. On that night, Bedwell and the other man fed the sisters hot dogs and alcohol. The sisters turned down the men's advances, so the 2 men beat the sisters to death and left their bodies on the side of the road. However, Bedwell's confession did not match the evidence that was found. Bedwell later recanted his confession, stating that the police had promised to let Bedwell go if he confessed. In addition, Bedwell was unable to read or write, and the confession was typed. Bedwell also had an alibi, as there were records of him clocking in for another job he worked at during the time when the sisters were most likely abducted. Bedwell was arrested for the murders, but he was later released. Another suspect was 17-year-old Max Fleek. Under Illinois' law, minors were not allowed to take the polygraph. The police decided to offer Fleek a polygraph anyways, and he subsequently failed. During the polygraph, he confessed to kidnapping the sisters, but due to the law, his confession was ruled inadmissible. There was no physical evidence to tie him to the murders, and no charges were ever filed. But years later, Fleek would kill a young woman and would be sent to prison. In 1958, police discovered the body of 15-year-old Bonnie Lee Scott. Bonnie Scott's case had many similarities to the Grimes sisters. Bonnie Scott's body was also nude, and she was located just 10 miles away from where the Grimes sisters had been discovered. What was strange was that around the time Bonnie Scott's body was found, Loretta Grimes received a phone call. The caller took responsibility for Bonnie Scott's murder and stated, quote, "I've committed another perfect crime," end quote. Loretta believes the caller was the same caller from a May 1957 phone call she received. During the phone call in 1957, the caller took responsibility for killing Loretta's daughters and even revealed a detail which was not released to the public. The caller knew that one of Loretta's daughters had a deformity to her foot. Police investigating Bonnie Scott's murder located a suspect, Charles Leroy Melquist. Police had also searched Melquist's apartment and found a list with girls' names on it. Some of the girls lived in the same neighborhood as the Grimes sisters. Despite the similarities in the two cases, Melquist was never questioned about the Grimes sisters. Melquist eventually confessed to Bonnie Scott's murder, and he was convicted in 1959. He was given a 99-year sentence, but only served 11 years. As for the murder of the Grimes sisters, the investigation went cold. Loretta continued to fight for justice for her two daughters and even received a promise from the police to continue the investigation until it was solved. Loretta passed away in 1989. There wasn't much activity in the case until 2010, when Ray Johnson, a retired detective from the West Chicago Police Department, began looking into the murders. Johnson's investigation led him to believe that Melquist was the murderer. Johnson made this conclusion based on the fact that the phone calls Loretta received were unpublished at the time. There were also marks on the abdomens of the sisters that matched marks on Bonnie Scott's abdomen. Johnson also spoke with a potential witness who claims that she was abducted with the Grimes sisters, but escaped and did not come forward out of fear. Melquist may have been shielded from the Grimes case due to his ties to the mob and a possible connection to one of the lead investigators on the Grimes case. No charges were ever filed against Melquist. Melquist has never been officially named as a suspect by the police. Although the murders occurred over 60 years ago, the case remains open. Johnson and others continue to uncover clues and investigate any potential leads. The hunt for the killer responsible for the murders of Barbara and Patricia Grimes continues.